Hello, and welcome to Hearth and Haunting, the channel where we explore the darkness that can lie hidden behind the most ordinary front doors. We believe that the most chilling stories are not always found in crumbling castles or forgotten graveyards, but in the quiet, carpeted rooms of suburbia, within the sacred, and sometimes shattered, bonds of family. The tale we are about to unravel for you tonight is one such story. It is a tragedy woven from love, deceit, and a secret so corrosive it dissolved the very foundations of a family, leading to a death that was both shocking and, in the end, devastatingly intimate. This is a story about the perfect daughter-in-law, the principled patriarch, and the dark truth that brought them to a fatal crossroads. Before we draw back the curtains on this family's final act, if you find yourself drawn to the complex, often heartbreaking, psychology of domestic tragedy, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. You won't want to miss the secrets we unearth. Now, pour yourself something warm, settle in, and let us begin the story of the Thompson family. Arthur Thompson believed in order. It was the principle upon which he had built his entire life. Order in the law, which he had served with distinction for 40 years as a prosecuting attorney and then a district court judge. Order in his home, a stately, two-story brick colonial where every book had its place and every memory was neatly filed away. And most importantly, order in his family. Since his beloved wife, Eleanor, had passed away 5 years ago, that order had centered around his son, Ben, and Ben's remarkable wife, Clara. To Arthur, Clara was nothing short of a godsend. She was the daughter he and Eleanor had never had. She was intelligent, poised, and possessed a warmth that seemed to fill every room she entered. She had brought a new light into Ben's life, transforming him from a slightly serious, work-focused architect into a doting husband and, 2 years ago, a proud father to their daughter, Lily. Clara managed their bustling lives with an effortless grace that Arthur deeply admired. She was the perfect wife, the perfect mother, and, to his endless gratitude, the perfect daughter-in-law. She included him in everything, from Sunday dinners to Lily's first tentative steps, ensuring the lonely quiet of his large house was frequently punctuated by the joyous chaos of family. This particular Saturday was a testament to that inclusion. Ben and Clara were in the throes of a massive spring cleaning project at their sleek, modern home a few miles away. They had unearthed a decade's worth of accumulated possessions from their basement and garage, and Clara had insisted Arthur come over to help them sort through it, framing it as a chance to share stories and memories. Arthur, whose own home was a bastion of organized history, was more than happy to lend his methodical mind to the task. The driveway was a landscape of cardboard boxes and black plastic bags. Ben, his face smudged with dust, was hauling a heavy box towards a rented dumpster. Clara, a colorful scarf holding her dark hair back, was directing the operation with the cheerful efficiency of a field marshal. "Dad, thank goodness you're here," she said, her smile as bright as the morning sun. "You're the only one who can talk sense into this man. He wants to throw everything away. I'm trying to preserve our history." "History is one thing, my boy," Arthur said with a wink to Ben. "Hoarding is another." The law recognizes a clear distinction. The day passed in a pleasant rhythm of labor and laughter. They sorted through Ben's old college textbooks, boxes of outdated electronics, and a startling number of half-finished DIY projects. Arthur regaled them with stories of Ben's childhood, prompted by the discovery of a tattered baseball glove or a box of forgotten comic books. Through it all, Clara was the perfect hostess, keeping them supplied with iced tea and sandwiches, her laughter the constant, melodic soundtrack to their work. It was late in the afternoon when they finally tackled the last, most formidable corner of the garage. Tucked away under a dusty tarp was a small stack of boxes that were clearly older than the rest. The cardboard was softened with age, the packing tape yellowed and brittle. "What's all this, Clara?" Ben asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "I don't recognize any of these." Clara glanced over, a flicker of something unreadable passing through her eyes before her bright smile returned. "Oh, that's just some of my old stuff from before we met, from my apartment in Chicago. Honestly, I'm amazed it survived all the moves. We can probably just toss the whole lot. Nonsense, Arthur said, his archivist's heart stirring. There could be treasures in here. Old photographs, letters. You can't just throw away your own history, my dear. Clara's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Really, Arthur, it's just junk. College papers, old clothes. Nothing important. But Ben, siding with his father, was already prying the tape off the top box. Come on, let's see. I want to see what my wife was like before she was stuck with me. With a sigh that seemed only partially feigned, Clara relented. The first few boxes were exactly as she described. Textbooks on art history, dusty portfolios of her early design work, clothes that were comically out of style. But it was the last box, the smallest one, tucked at the very bottom, that felt different. It was heavier than it looked, and sealed more thoroughly. This is the one, Ben declared dramatically. This is where she keeps her secret love letters from old boyfriends. You wish, Clara retorted, her voice a little too sharp. Ben, honey, why don't you and your dad start loading the dumpster while I finish up here? My back is starting to act up. It was a clear dismissal, but Arthur, his curiosity piqued by her sudden change in demeanor, chose to ignore it. We're almost done, my dear. Let's just see what's in this last one. Many hands make light work. He knelt down, his old knees protesting, and slit the tape with the pocket knife he always carried. As he lifted the flaps, a faint, musty smell of old paper and perfume rose from within. The contents were a jumble of personal mementos, a dried corsage, a handful of concert ticket stubs, a stack of postcards, and beneath them, a small, velvet-covered jewelry box and a thick, manila envelope. He opened the jewelry box first. Inside, nestled on the faded satin lining, was a silver locket. It was tarnished with age and dented, one side pushed in as if from a sharp impact. He pressed the small clasp and it sprang open. One side was empty, a void where a photograph should have been. The other side held a tiny, professionally shot photo of a smiling, red-haired young woman he didn't recognize. Who's this? He asked, holding it up. Clara, who had been standing rigidly by the garage door, walked over and took the locket from him. Her hand was not quite steady. Oh, that was a friend from college. We had a falling out. I'd forgotten I even had this. She closed the locket with a decisive snap and slipped it into her pocket. Her movements were too quick, too final. Arthur's finely honed instincts, the same instincts that had helped him red juries and unnerve witnesses for decades, began to prickle. Something was wrong. He turned his attention to the manila envelope. It was unsealed. He tipped it, and a single, yellowed newspaper clipping slid out into his hand. The headline was stark: Local student killed in tragic hit and run. Police seek witnesses. The dateline was from a small town in Ohio, dated 15 years prior. The article detailed the death of a 19-year-old college student named Sarah Jenkins, struck by a vehicle that had fled the scene. It mentioned that the case remained unsolved, a cold, lingering tragedy for the small community. There was a grainy photograph accompanying the article. It was the same smiling, red-haired young woman from the locket. The garage, which had been filled with warm, nostalgic chatter all day, was suddenly, profoundly silent. The air grew thick and heavy. Ben was looking from the newspaper clipping in his father's hand to his wife's pale, taut face, a look of utter confusion on his own. Clara? Ben's voice was hesitant. What is this? Why do you have this? Clara forced a laugh, but it was a brittle, fragile sound. It's what I said. Sarah was my friend. My roommate. That was a terrible time. I guess I kept the clipping to remember her. Her explanation was plausible. It made sense. But it didn't feel true. Arthur could see it in the way she refused to meet his eyes, in the way her hands were clenched into tight fists at her sides. Arthur folded the clipping carefully and stood up, his knees cracking in protest. He looked at his daughter-in-law, the woman he had admired and loved, and for the first time, he felt as if he were looking at a complete stranger. The warmth and grace were gone, replaced by a brittle, defensive wall. A terrible tragedy. Arthur said, his voice neutral, betraying none of the cold dread that was beginning to coil in his stomach. Unsolved, you said? Yes, Clara whispered, her eyes darting towards Ben. A silent plea for support. They never found the person who did it. Well, Ben said, trying to break the suffocating tension. That's awful. But it's old history, right? We should probably get this stuff cleared out. He was looking for a return to normalcy, an escape from the sudden, uncomfortable gravity that had descended upon them. But for Arthur, it was too late. The pieces, disparate and horrifying, were beginning to click into place in his mind. Clara, before she moved to Chicago and met Ben, had attended college in Ohio. He remembered her mentioning it once. Vaguely. The timeline fit. The dented locket, a possible keepsake from the scene of the crime. The newspaper clipping, a morbid souvenir. The panicked, desperate lies. It was a hypothesis, a wild, unthinkable leap of logic, but it landed with the sickening thud of truth in his gut. He looked at his son, so blissfully, painfully unaware, still trying to protect his wife from an uncomfortable memory. He looked at his granddaughter Lily's bright pink tricycle parked by the door, a symbol of the perfect, happy family they had all built together. And then he looked at Clara, and in her eyes, he saw not grief for a lost friend, but the deep, cold, and terrifying shadow of a very dark secret. The order of his world had been fractured, and in its place was a shocking, horrifying question. Was the perfect woman his son had married, the loving mother of his grandchild, a killer? The days following the discovery in the garage were a study in strained civility. On the surface, nothing had changed. Clara called him every other day to check in, her voice as warm and solicitous as ever. Ben brought Lily over for their regular Wednesday afternoon visit, and Arthur played with his granddaughter, the joyous sound of her laughter a temporary balm on his troubled soul. But beneath the placid surface of their family routine, a chasm had opened. A cold, silent war was being waged, a war of unspoken accusations and fearful, guarded glances. Arthur could not let it go. The prosecutor in him, the man who had dedicated his life to the pursuit of truth and the meticulous anatomy of a lie, was reawakened. He had spent his retirement in the quiet comfort of his garden and his library, but now the old ghost was back. The thrill of the hunt, the gnawing need to know, had taken root in his heart, and it was a terrible, poisonous bloom. He began his investigation in the one place he still felt completely in control, his study. The room, lined with leather-bound law books and the ghosts of 1,000 closed cases, became his sanctuary and his war room. He started with what he knew. Clara had attended Ohio State University. A few careful, discreet inquiries online confirmed the dates. She had been enrolled at the time of Sarah Jenkins's death. In fact, she had withdrawn from the university less than a month after the incident, citing personal family reasons. It was the first hard, corroborating fact, and it settled in his stomach like a lead weight. He then turned his attention to the victim, Sarah Jenkins, a bright, popular art history student, an only child. Her parents, he discovered with a pang of deep, profound sadness, had both passed away in the years since, their obituaries mentioning their unending grief over their beloved, lost daughter. There was no one left to fight for her, no one to demand the justice she had been denied for 15 years. No one, perhaps, except him. The old instincts were kicking in. He knew how to find information, how to follow the cold, dead trails of the past. He made a call to a former colleague, now a high-ranking official in the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, framing his questions as research for a memoir he was considering writing about old, unsolved cases. He was careful, vague, a retired judge merely indulging a professional curiosity. The colleague was happy to oblige a legend of the bar. A few days later, a thick, confidential file arrived by courier. It was the complete police report on the Sarah Jenkins hit and run. He spread the contents across his large mahogany desk. Grainy crime scene photos, witness statements, forensic reports. He read for hours, his mind sharp and focused, reconstructing the night of the crime. Sarah had been walking back to her dorm from a late-night study session at the library. The road was dark, poorly lit. The witnesses, 2 students walking 100 yards behind her, had heard the sickening thud of the impact and the squeal of tires, but had only seen a dark-colored sedan speeding away. The forensic evidence was scant. A few fragments of paint, a piece of a broken headlight. The paint was a common factory color used by several domestic automakers from that era. The headlight fragment was from a specific model, a Ford Taurus, manufactured between 1998 and 2002. It was a detail, a small, solid piece of the puzzle. The next day, feigning a sudden interest in old family records, he asked Ben if he and Clara still had the paperwork for her old cars. Ben, eager to please the father he felt had been acting distant lately, found a file in their home office. And there it was, a bill of sale and registration for a dark blue, 2001 Ford Taurus, purchased by Clara Miller, her maiden name, 2 years before the incident. The records showed she had sold the car for scrap to a junkyard 6 weeks after Sarah Jenkins's death, claiming it had significant, unrepairable engine trouble. The chain of evidence was becoming a noose. A circumstantial one, yes, but a powerful one. The motive for her flight from Ohio, the make and model of the car, the suspicious timing of its disposal. It all pointed in one horrifying direction. He knew he had to confront her, but he also knew he had to speak to his son. He owed Ben that. He invited Ben to dinner, just the 2 of them at his house. The meal was tense. Ben was clearly on edge, torn between loyalty to his wife and a lifetime of respect for his father. "Dad, what's going on?" Ben finally asked, pushing his plate away. "You've been different ever since that day in the garage. Clara's worried about you. She thinks you're upset about something, that maybe you're lonely." Arthur took a deep breath. "Ben, I need to talk to you about Clara, about her past." Ben's face hardened instantly. "Dad, don't. Whatever you're thinking, just stop. That thing with the newspaper clipping. It was a long time ago. She lost her friend. It's a painful memory. You're dredging things up that need to be left alone." "This is more than a painful memory," Arthur said, his voice low and firm. "This is about an unsolved crime. A young woman died, Ben. And I believe Clara knows more about it than she's letting on." He laid it all out for his son, calmly, logically, as if he were presenting a case to a jury. He spoke of Clara's sudden departure from the university, of the make and model of her car, of its suspicious disposal. He presented the facts, devoid of emotion, letting their terrible weight speak for themselves. Ben listened, his face growing paler with each new piece of information. But when Arthur was finished, he shook his head, a look of desperate denial in his eyes. No, it's a coincidence. It has to be. Dad, you don't know Clara. She's the kindest, most gentle person I've ever met. She couldn't hurt anyone. And even if it was an accident, she wouldn't run. That's not who she is. People do desperate things when they're young and scared, Ben, Arthur said gently. And they build entire lives to keep those secrets buried. So what are you saying? Ben's voice was rising, laced with anger and fear. You're saying my wife, the mother of your granddaughter, is a criminal? That you've been investigating her behind our backs? You're choosing some 15-year-old cold case over your own family. I am choosing the truth. Arthur's voice boomed, the old prosecutor's fire returning. Justice doesn't have an expiration date. What kind of man would I be if I ignored this? What kind of man are you, if you're willing to? The accusation hung in the air between them, ugly and unforgivable. Ben stood up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. I know what kind of man I am. I'm a husband and a father, and I protect my family. You should try it sometime. Stay away from us, Dad. Stay away from Clara. He turned and stormed out, slamming the front door behind him, the sound echoing through the silent, orderly house like a gunshot. Arthur sat alone in the dining room, the remnants of their uneaten dinner growing cold. He had lost his son. The carefully ordered world he had cherished was shattering around him. He knew, with a terrible certainty, that Clara was now manipulating Ben, poisoning him against his own father, painting Arthur as a senile, meddling old man lost in the paranoid fantasies of his past profession. But he was not a fantasist. He was a seeker of truth. And he had one last card to play. He had spent his life staring down liars, and he knew their tells, their weaknesses. He would confront Clara himself. He would give her one chance to tell the truth. One chance to save her soul and perhaps what was left of their family. He picked up the phone, his hand steady despite the tremor in his heart, and called her. "Clara," he said, his voice a calm, cold blade. "We need to talk. Tonight. I'm coming over." He didn't wait for a reply. He hung up the phone. The final act was about to begin, and he knew, with a chilling sense of premonition, that it would end in tragedy. The drive to Ben and Clara's house was the longest 10 minutes of Arthur's life. The familiar streets of his quiet, tree-lined neighborhood seemed alien, the warm lights in his neighbors' windows like portals to other, happier lives. He was a man on his way to detonate a bomb in the heart of his own family, and the knowledge of the coming devastation was a physical weight on his chest. He had a known heart condition, a slight murmur his doctor had warned him to manage with medication and a low-stress lifestyle. Tonight, his heart was a frantic, protesting drum against his ribs. When he arrived, only Clara's car was in the driveway. Ben, it seemed, was not home, a fact for which Arthur was both grateful and terrified. This had to be between him and her. He walked up the stone pathway to the front door, the house a picture of modern, domestic tranquility, all clean lines and soft, glowing light. It was a beautiful lie. Clara opened the door before he could ring the bell. She was dressed in simple black slacks and a white silk blouse, her face pale but her expression composed, almost defiant. The warm, welcoming daughter-in-law was gone. In her place was a stranger, a woman preparing for battle. "Arthur," she said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "Ben isn't here. He took Lily to his sister's for the night. He said he needed some space." It was both an explanation and an accusation. "This is what you've done." "It's better this way," Arthur said, stepping past her into the minimalist foyer. "This conversation is for us." She led him to the living room, a space that was usually filled with Lily's toys and the scent of Clara's baking. Tonight, it felt as cold and sterile as a hospital waiting room. They didn't sit. They stood facing each other across a vast expanse of white carpet, two adversaries in a silent, deadly duel. "You need to stop this," Clara began, her voice low and trembling with a tightly controlled rage. "You are destroying our family. You are poisoning your own son against you, all because of some paranoid delusion." "Is it a delusion, Clara?" Arthur's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a shard of glass. "Is it a delusion that you attended Ohio State University until 1 month after Sarah Jenkins was killed? Is it a delusion that you owned a dark blue 2001 Ford Taurus, the exact model the police identified from fragments at the scene? Is it a delusion that you sold that car for scrap just weeks later? Tell me, Clara, which part is my delusion?" He watched as the color drained completely from her face. The carefully constructed wall of defiance crumbled, and for the first time, he saw the terrified young woman she must have been 15 years ago. Her composure shattered, replaced by raw, unadulterated fear. "You don't understand," she whispered, her hands twisting together. "You couldn't possibly understand." And then the confession came. It wasn't a single, dramatic moment, but a flood, a torrent of buried guilt and fear that poured out of her in a broken, sobbing narrative. She had been at a party that night. She'd had a few drinks, not drunk, she insisted, but not sober either. She was arguing with her boyfriend on the phone as she drove, distracted, upset. She never even saw Sarah until the last second. The thud, the terrible, sickening sound. She had panicked. She was 19, her whole life ahead of her. A scholarship, a future. In one horrifying, split second, she saw it all vanishing. So she drove away. She just drove away. She spent the next few weeks in a fugue of terror, jumping at every siren, convinced every knock on the door was the police. The guilt was eating her alive. So she ran. She dropped out of school, sold the car, and moved to Chicago, determined to become a new person, a person who could never do something so terrible. She had dedicated her life to being good, to being perfect, to building a life so full of light that it would burn away the darkness of that one unforgivable moment. "I am not that person anymore," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "That girl is dead. Don't you see? I've spent every day of my life trying to atone for what she did. Being a good wife to your son, a good mother to your granddaughter. Doesn't that count for anything?" Arthur listened, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest. He felt a flicker of pity for the scared, stupid 19-year-old girl she had been. But he also saw Sarah Jenkins, her life extinguished on a dark road, her parents going to their graves with broken hearts. He saw the 15 years of lies, the calculated deception that had formed the very foundation of the family he loved. "It counts for your life," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his judgment. "But it does not erase what you did. Atonement requires confession, Clara, not a more perfect hiding place." "And what will you do?" she shot back, her grief hardening into a desperate, feral anger. "Tell the police? Send me to prison? Take Lily's mother away from her? Destroy your own son's life? For what? For some abstract concept of justice for a girl who is long dead and whose family is gone? For the truth!" he thundered, the force of his conviction sending a sharp, searing pain through his chest. He staggered back, his hand flying to his heart as a wave of dizziness washed over him. The room tilted, the clean white walls seeming to close in on him. "My pills!" he gasped, his breath catching in his throat. "On the mantelpiece, in my coat." Clara stared at him, her eyes wide with a horrifying, sudden clarity. She saw him, the old man clutching his chest, his face turning a ghastly shade of gray. And she saw his coat, draped over a chair just a few feet away. She saw the small amber bottle in the pocket. She saw the choice, laid out before her with a terrible, stark simplicity. She could save him. She could run to the coat, fumble for the pills, call an ambulance. And when he recovered, he would tell his story. Her life would be over. The perfect world she had so painstakingly built would be reduced to ashes. Or she could do nothing. She could stand perfectly still and watch the man who held her secret in his hands die. His death would be a tragedy. A terrible, unfortunate heart attack, likely brought on by the stress of his recent, distressing conflict with his son. A family tragedy. No one would ever know. Her secret would die with him. The moment stretched into an eternity. Arthur's eyes, wide with pain and a dawning, terrible understanding, were locked on hers. He saw the calculation in her gaze. He saw her choice. He tried to speak, to plead, but only a choked, gurgling sound escaped his lips. Clara did not move. She stood as still as a statue, a silent, unblinking witness to his final judgment. She watched as the life faded from his eyes. She watched as he crumpled to the pristine white carpet. She watched until the last, shuddering breath had left his body. Only then, in the profound and absolute silence that followed, did she begin to scream. The aftermath was exactly as she had predicted. The paramedics arrived to find a hysterical, grieving daughter-in-law and her dead father-in-law. The coroner ruled the death a massive coronary event. A tragedy, everyone said. Poor Arthur. His heart just gave out. Ben was destroyed, consumed by a guilt so profound it hollowed him out. He blamed himself, blamed the terrible fight they'd had, the last, angry words he had spoken to his father. Clara was his rock, his comfort, the perfect, grieving widow to a man who had been like a father to her. She held him, she soothed him, and she kept her secret locked away in the cold, silent tomb where her conscience used to be. Months later, their life had found a new, quieter rhythm. The perfect family was intact, their future secure. But the victory was a hollow one. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Clara would wake up in a cold sweat, The image of Arthur's pleading, knowing eyes burned into her mind. She would look at her sleeping husband, his face etched with a permanent, lingering sadness, and at her beautiful daughter, sleeping soundly in the next room, and she would be struck by a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. She had her perfect life. Her secret was safe. But she had discovered the terrible price of silence, and she knew, with a certainty that would haunt her for the rest of her days, that she would be paying it forever.